Good afternoon, bon après-midi. Je veux remercier tous mes collègues et mes amis, la ministre Saint-Onge, the ministre O'Regan, MP Lambropoulos, Parliamentary Secretary Pam Demoff, for being with us this afternoon. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are making today's announcement from the unceded traditional territories of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Territory. It was only a few years ago that the Prime Minister expressed an apology to two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex plus communities in Canada. It was an historic moment felt by all parliamentarians and indeed all Canadians, especially members of the community. À ce moment-là, nous avons reconnu la dure réalité. La communauté de LGBTQI+, ont été humiliés, emprisonnés, puis se sont retrouvés avec un casier judiciaire en raison de leur orientation sexuelle. This was wrong, and it should never have occurred. There was a time when members of the community lost their jobs, their livelihoods. They were prohibited from serving for the country and indeed pushed to the side of the community. Members of the 2S LGBTQI+ were made a pariah by their own government. Reconnaître ces injustices passées était le premier pas pour s'assurer qu'elles ne se reproduiraient jamais et qu'il n'y ait plus jamais de moment où la loi permette que des personnes soient poursuivies et condamnées comme des criminels simplement à cause de la personne qu'ils aiment. Now, as part of the apology, the Prime Minister also announced legislation that would allow for the striking out of historically unjust convictions that was based on a fundamental value, that everyone should be able to live their lives free from stigma, discrimination, prejudice, and violence. The Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act was introduced and passed into law in June of 2018. And by doing so, the government created a path for the permanent erasing of criminal records related to historical injustices. And that is why today we are able to be here to announce yet another step towards righting past wrongs that were related to the way in which our justice system worked, and to further protect human rights. And so today, I am very pleased to announce that the Government of Canada will enable convictions under the Criminal Code for bawdy house and indecency-based offences to be eligible for expungement. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'annoncer que le gouvernement du Canada permettra la radiation des condamnations en vertu du Code criminel pour les infractions liées aux maisons de débauche et aux indécences. Historically, Canada has criminalized venues that were considered to be safe spaces for 2S LGBTQI+ communities, such as bathhouses, nightclubs, and swingers clubs. And as a result, owners, employees, and patrons of these venues were convicted under the Criminal Code unjustly. Aujourd'hui, l'ajout de ces infractions à la liste des infractions pouvant faire l'objet d'une radiation constitue une nouvelle étape vers la correction de l'application injuste de ces lois à l'encontre des communautés de LGBTQI+. Je suis fier de constater que cette mesure répond également à un engagement clé du plan d'action fédéral pour les LGBTQI+, qui vise à faire progresser les droits et l'égalité des personnes LGBTQI+ au Canada. As the Prime Minister said in his apology, The discrimination we see is not a moment in time, but an ongoing, centuries-old campaign. We want to be a partner and an ally to LGBTQ2 Canadians in the years going forward. And that is why we have been and will continue to work hard to address issues impacting two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex plus individuals, and stand against discrimination in all of its forms. Equally, as part of the government's ardent commitment to advancing gender equality, I'm proud to also announce that those convicted of abortion-related offences will now be eligible for expungement. De plus, dans le cadre de notre engagement à faire progresser l'égalité des sexes, je suis fier d'annoncer que les personnes condamnées pour des délits liés à l'avortement pourront désormais bénéficier d'une radiation. Il y a 35 ans, la Cour suprême du Canada a déclaré inconstitutionnelles les infractions qui restreignent l'accès à l'avortement. Today, in recognition of this historically unjust criminalization, the convictions of individuals who sought an abortion and the medical practitioners who provide those reproductive health services who at great personal risk stood up for the right to choose can now have those convictions expunged. On the eve of International Women's Day, I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues who have been tireless champions for the cause of all that is right and just, and today we have taken an historic step towards righting those wrongs. But I also want to make clear that there is much more work to be done on that front. And I would be remiss as well if I did not also acknowledge the tireless advocacy of colleagues who I know are very supportive of this work, including our friend Rob Oliphant, Randy Boissonneau, Marcy Ian, and so many others. It takes a village, and we will continue to work with all members of that village and that community to do this work. Je vais passer la parole maintenant à mon collègue Pascal.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Je suis très contente d'être ici en appui de l'annonce de mon collègue Mendicino. En tant que femme, membre de la communauté LGBTQ2+, c'est un moment qui est important. On sait à quel point avoir un dossier criminel, ça a des impacts sur tous les aspects de la vie d'une personne. Et quand c'est pour des condamnations injustes, notamment pour être qui on est, ou encore pour avoir usé de notre droit de choisir dans le cas de l'avortement, c'est aujourd'hui une façon de corriger ces erreurs du passé et de rendre une partie de la vie aux personnes qui devaient gérer cette situation-là avec un dossier criminel, donc de leur donner la possibilité là, de se libérer de ce fardeau-là. Alors, je remercie mon collègue et tout le parti et tous les gens qui ont milité, mais c'est une excellente journée pour la communauté, puis je suis très fière d'être là pour partager ce moment-là avec mes collègues ici.
Merci, Pascal. Seamus, please go ahead.
That's what you do. I think Marco put it best. I would just say that if we're going to be turning a page, then we have to turn all the pages. And I look and listen to, those who came before me and have allowed me to live a happy and fulfilled life. These are people who were on the front lines of the rights of many LGBTQ people in this country. And for those who have been affected by this, they deserve this. This is the least they deserve. And more importantly, this is an important acknowledgement that we are turning a page and that we will turn all the pages. I think we've come incredibly far in this country, but we have to acknowledge the wrongs of the past and do right by them.
Merci, Seamus. Pascal, question?
Oui, M. Mendicino, sur la question de l'avortement, avez-vous une évaluation du nombre de personnes qui auraient de tels casiers qui seraient soumis à l'expungement?
Mais ça, c'est un des processus que nous sommes en train de suivre avec l'annonce aujourd'hui. C'est un annonce vraiment historique, comme mes collègues ont exprimé, et on va suivre avec l'implémentation qui peuvent adresser une injustice qui était là pour assez longtemps. Donc, oui, il y a des étapes encore sur l'implémentation de suivre, mais c'est une importante annonce aujourd'hui.
Maybe I'll repeat this in English. I was just wondering if you have a number of
Un
people.
nombre? Non,
Yeah.
les statistiques, les chiffres, ça c'est exactement ce que nous sommes en train d'examiner. Oui.
Okay.
In anglais, s'il vous plaît. Can you answer in English?
So I said that today is an historic announcement to address an historical injustice. As you heard both of my colleagues express, it is the lived experiences of members of the community, both in the 2S LGBTQI+, as well as women who were stigmatized, who were convicted in the criminal justice system. What today's announcement allows for is a pathway to expunge those criminal convictions, because historically they led to stigmatization and marginalization and depriving them of a sense of belonging by virtue of their sexual orientation or their gender. And that is wrong. And the question related to what is the process? Have you done an impact analysis of the total number of individuals who might be able to benefit from this? And I explained that we're in the process of undertaking that analysis so that we can roll this out as quickly as possible.
I'm wondering why make people apply for this, not just give it to them.
Look, it's something that I think does allow people to step forward and to express, not only on behalf of those who are still living, but equally for those who may have been convicted and who are now deceased. There will also be a pathway for their families to come forward to ask for an expungement to remove that stigma. So we are looking at ways to reduce barriers to facilitate the expungement. I would also point out that there is no fee involved and that the public service will be there to help individuals navigate so that they can get the full benefit of this program.
And will you be contacting anybody who can apply for this? How will people be made aware that they're eligible, other than maybe read it in the newspaper?
In short, I think by making sure that we work closely with members of the community, those organizations that advocate on behalf of them. I mean, I'm looking here, you see Emmanuel Lambropoulos, who's the chair of our Women's Caucus, Pam Demoff, who's done so much incredible work advocating for groups in both women and the 2S LGBTQI+. We have two members of the community who are here. It's about spreading the word. It's about making sure that there is an awareness that this is an announcement that builds on the introduction of the expungement legislation that was attached to the apology, which the Prime Minister expressed on behalf of the government in the Chamber some few years ago. And now this is a tangible way in which we can take the next important step to move beyond words and acknowledgement, which are important, because as I said in my remarks, that's the first step into concrete action and deeds, and in that regard, this is an important and historic announcement.
There are concerns that one condition to make someone ineligible for this expungement is if sex for money was part of their record. Many of the LGBTQ communities say that police just added that in based on discrimination. Will that be a condition, and if so, why?
I think that's a very important question, and as I had mentioned earlier, we want to be sure that there are as few barriers to getting access to an expungement as possible. And the idea of transactions based on money have for far too long stigmatized workers, sex workers. And so as we navigate that, I think it is important to put that lens on the work of getting access to expungements as well. Today, we're here to make the announcement that this is going to allow us to use the legislation which we introduced to remove that stigma by virtue of sexual orientation or gender, which is obviously an historical injustice.
So at this point, you can't say whether or not this would be one of the limitations to the expungement.
I think the point that I would leave you with is that we are going to take an approach that will reduce as many barriers as possible, whether it's with regards to fees, of course there are none, or with regards to the issue that you pointed out. We want this to be facilitative. We want this to be focused on the members who were most impacted by the discrimination that led to the historical injustice in the first place. And that stigma continues it informs not only our policy approach, our legislative approach, but the values that so many others have expressed today.
On the national security measures announced yesterday around foreign interference, I have a couple of questions. There are a number of critics who think that it's a problem that your government hasn't updated the national security strategy from 2004. What's your answer to that? Is that a problem? Is that a contributing factor to the scattershot approach your government takes on this?
Well, in the first case, I think you're right, Tonda, to highlight that the national security landscape has evolved significantly since 2004. But on the other side of the equation, since we took the reins in 2015, far from sitting idly by in the face of that evolution, the government has taken significant steps, very significant leaps, by introducing a number of tools and authorities that would better equip those who work in the community of national security and public safety to address and mitigate new threats that are related to foreign interference and other potential risks to our national security.
Is a new roadmap needed?
I was just coming to that. I wanted to sort of highlight what our approach is because
An hour of that yesterday from the Prime Minister, so I just would like to focus on some of the observations that have been made about that announcement.
Well, look, I'm addressing what I think is the premise of your question. And the premise of your question suggests that we have not moved since 2004, and nothing could be further from the truth. Put together, when you take a look at Bill C-59, which gave CSIS new threat reduction measures, that was important. It was important because it was an authority that was requested by the national security community to be more flexible and adaptive to the way in which these threats materialize. I would point out that at the same time, we have also raised the bar significantly on transparency. There have been a lot of questions that have been asked about how it is that foreign interference may have materialized throughout the course of the elections. What did we do? We created 2 independent panels that examined the circumstances of those elections and were able to confirm that they were not compromised and that they were held in a free and fair manner. Now, that is critically important for Canadians to know so that they can have confidence in their institutions. We created those authorities. We created those mechanisms that drive transparency. And going forward, yesterday's announcement is yet another step that will appoint a special rapporteur who will help to coordinate and channel the energies of both NCCOP and NCIRA as they also examine the questions that have been raised around the elections. And we have said that whatever recommendations that individual puts forward, an individual who possesses the qualifications, the expertise, the knowledge on how to navigate this terrain, we will accept, including potentially a public inquiry if that ends up being the recommendation.
Canadians feel a sense of urgency around some of these issues ahead of the next campaign. I want to know what deadlines you've put on all of these pieces of work, both the NSI COP, the NCIRA work, the Special Rapporteur's work, and then potentially an inquiry's work.
They're expeditious. We will take the steps that are necessary to appoint a special rapporteur in a matter of a very short period of time. We're talking about weeks, not months. These are conversations that are ongoing between my office and the Prime Minister's office and the government. And we want to make sure that that individual is named as quickly as possible so that again, we can channel this work with 2 respective bodies who have robust access to classified information, who can offer recommendations. Indeed, in addition to the announcement of the special rapporteur, you also heard that we will be proceeding with a national conversation on the creation of a foreign agent registry.
Right, and on that, you've been talking about that since last June in consultations. Why aren't consultations done on that already so that you can roll out a response, whether you're going to give it a green light or not?
Well, first, again, I want to address the premise of your question. Since we have signaled that intention, we have been laying the foundation for the official consultations to start. So we're going to hit the ground running roll up our sleeves and do the work when it comes to making sure that we get this new authority right. This is not an uncomplicated area. I have worked in this space. Before I got into politics, I was a federal prosecutor who worked with national security agencies who applied these laws. You have to make sure that you establish the threshold correctly. You have to make sure that you set the appropriate parameters for that law to be applied. And most importantly, once it's applied, you have to be upfront and transparent with Canadians so that there can be accountability. And this is not a conversation that can be just simply, steamrolled through. It has to be done in a way that is inclusive of all communities, because speaking candidly, the fact is that there have been occasions in the past where there have been either overreaches of authorities or abuse of power, and that we have to guard against. And the way in which we can do that is by ensuring that these new authorities are founded on the Charter. And for me, it's about making sure that we have that conversation in a way that is respectful not only of the complexities of the law, but equally in a way that is respectful of the individual rights and freedoms that are enjoyed by every Canadian under the Charter, which is why today's announcement is also important.
Go back to the announcement today. Sorry, I'm not super familiar, but if I get it correctly, you're adding a list of offenses for which the expungement is possible, and some of them being decency, bawdy house, etc., etc. So I'm just wondering, would those expungement be available only for people coming out from the LGBTQ plus community, or for all of them? Because some people commit those offenses in totally different context, and would they get an expungement?
No, I think you're right. And obviously, one does not have to have been a member of the 2S LGBTQI plus community to have been convicted for getting access to an abortion. So the two are not mutually exclusive.
No, I was not talking about abortion, of course, but the other part, the decency, bawdy house, I think you mentioned swingers club as well. So would you have to be part of the LGBTQ, or all people who got convicted for those offenses would be eligible for expungement?
I think it starts first with self-identification and orientation. So if a member steps forward and identifies within that community and presents the circumstances in which they were convicted of an offense that falls under the category, then naturally they will be eligible, and that is the point. This is about addressing an historical injustice that focuses on the nature of the offense, the identity of the individual who is coming forward, and obviously with an emphasis on those members who were stigmatized and marginalized as a result of their sexual orientation and identity.
How do you set the self-identification? So, I mean, how does the government make the difference between a straight man going to a bawdy house versus, a gay man who was convicted for other reasons?
I think it starts by listening. I think you first have to listen to the individual who comes forward and explains the circumstances in which they identify with the community. And by listening to the individual and their and the way in which they identify, we then proceed to the offense. And
Civil service will do that?
well, as informed by the principles and values of this announcement.
Since you last moved to allow expungements in 2019, what year is it, related to LGBTQ rights, there have been very few applications and even fewer expungements granted. So, people going through that process have said that it's complicated. So what are you doing to make that process easier, or is this just about optics today?
No, in fact, I think, as I said earlier, it's about reducing as many barriers as possible. And that means making sure that there's no cost that attaches to this. That means making sure that we stand up the services that are necessary to help people navigate through the application. But I think it's actually more appropriate for those who identify with the community maybe to speak about the importance of having a system that is facilitated. I don't know, Seamus or Pascal, if you want to speak to that value.
Je pense que le gros de la question, c'est que la majorité des descentes policières qui ont eu lieu, c'était pour cibler en particulier la communauté LGBTQ2+. Donc, de faciliter le processus pour que ces personnes-là puissent avoir accès à the expungement, à l'élimination du dossier criminel. sur la question, entre autres, qui a été soulevée par rapport à l'orientation sexuelle. J'ai pas les statistiques non plus, puis mon collègue pourra peut-être faire des vérifications puis vous revenir, mais je pense que la majorité des descentes ciblaient d'abord et avant tout les gens de la communauté et non pas des saunas.
L'indécence est une infraction au code criminel qui peut être appliquée à plein de cas. Il y a plein de gens qui sont montrés la graine sur la place publique, par exemple. On a vu ça. Est-ce que cette personne-là peut appliquer aussi?
Ben, c'est une question plus technique. Là. Je vais laisser Marco parler.
J'ai déjà répondu, mais en français, il faut commencer
On a
avec...
compris.
Et voilà. Mais il faut commencer avec l'identification de la personne et on va commencer avec un exercice d'entendre les individus qui vont assumer une application. Mais Seamus, did you want to say a few additional words just about
Not
the need
really.
for a barrier?
I don't want to be.
But
I
you
don't
will
wanna-
anyways?
No, I don't want to adjudicate attendance at bawdy houses in the 1970s or 80s or whatever. I don't, not to make light of it, but I'm not aware of that level of detail. Other than I think, you know, I'm mindful of people who not only identify with the community, but those who are allied with the community. I don't know why they may have been in houses or at the time, but I think the point is, if those who were criminally charged, the vast number of them would have been members of the community, and I think that's what's important here.
Minister, can I ask one more question on the special rapporteur, the Bloc Québécois wants that person, whoever it is, to be approved in a vote in Parliament. And I want to ask you two things. First of all, is that on the table? Will the government commit to allowing Parliament to have a say on who the rapporteur is? And do you have names now in play for who that is?
I think I would combine both questions by simply committing that the government will reach across partisan lines to work with the opposition in the process of putting together a list of individuals who will possess the qualifications, the expertise, the background to ensure that the person who fills that job has the competence and the independence that is necessary to put forward a recommendation to the government. And those conversations will be rooted in the value that fighting against foreign interference to protect our democratic institutions, most especially our elections, is not a partisan issue. Merci.